Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and I'm here to do another wrap up, this time talking adult science fiction and fantasy. I feel like I always say this, but it's true. This is a really good group of books. I have some new favorites here, some books I received from publishers, so they're new releases. And I just think there's something for everyone. There's artificial intelligence, some cool technology, and some emotional gut-punching moments. So all that being said, let's get into the books. First, I want to talk science fiction, and I received copies of the Machine Dynasty trilogy. The first book is VN, the second book is ID, and the brand new release is Rev, which completes the trilogy. I'm going to be talking about all three books because I binged them back to back, but for the sake of keeping this spoiler free, I'm not going to discuss any plot points outside of VN, but I'll be letting you know that I really enjoyed this trilogy. This is one that I received from the publisher Angry Robot Books, and this is set in a future where we have developed synthetic life, so artificial intelligence. In this future, they're known as VN, and they're very unique because they really do appear to be human. From the outside, you really can't tell the difference. However, they are programmed so that they will not harm humans. They have what are called fail-safes. So if they ever cause harm to humans or don't protect humans, they will basically be shut down and essentially die. This is a really unique take on the artificial intelligence story, and one I haven't seen before. I am a huge sucker for AI stories, so I've read a lot, but I can say I've never read one quite like this. This one is just a little bit kooky. In the first book, we follow a family with a young daughter, and the young daughter, Amy, in order to protect her mother, ends up eating her own synthetic grandmother, and she breaks some of the robotic laws, and the failsafe doesn't actually stop her. So the story involves her going on the run, teaming up with other VN, and just trying to survive. So this is a really interesting combination of a very intellectual science fiction story that deals with a lot of issues of personhood and identity and rights for artificial intelligence, but it also is a really good story in terms of narrative drive. There's a lot of plot and action that happens, so it's not slow paced, and it's definitely a story that will keep you going. And it is one that is a bit of a kookier story. I find the narrative to be a little bit different than anything I've read before, but I think that's good because, again, I've read so many stories about AI, and I can honestly say I've never read one quite like this. I did read all three books, and I do recommend starting at the beginning with this one, VN, going on to ID, and then finishing up with Rev, because the story won't fully make sense if you try to pick up Rev right away. So you do want to go back to the beginning, but they're relatively short books, easy to fly through, and I will let you know without spoiling anything that I really thought it had a good conclusion. So many series and trilogies just drop off at the end, but I thought that this series was great from start to finish. There was no slump in the middle, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. It definitely made me think. This is not the simplest science fiction story, so I wouldn't recommend it to those of you that are beginners and haven't really ventured into the genre yet, but as long as you're someone who has read at least a good handful of science fiction stories, I do think this one is accessible. There is a lot of complex ideas described in the story, and they do use a lot of words like iterate that you need to kind of learn what they mean, but the author does take the time to explain what is happening, so it's very easy to understand if you're paying attention and are used to reading science fiction already. So highly recommend it to anyone who loves AI stories as much as I do, and again, are looking for something different, something unique that feels really fresh and is just so much fun. Next is another book I received from the publisher, and that is Stormblood by Szal. This is one that I received from the UK publisher Gallant, so thank you for sending this all the way to Canada. And this is the first book in a trilogy, and this book centers around a future where there is technology called Stormblood that allows people to be turned into super soldiers. So the story specifically follows one man who is now ex-military. He fought for the Harmony against the Reapers, and now he is in retirement or has left the military because the technology of the Stormblood really did ruin or change his life, and he is dealing with the effects of that. because Stormblood is a technology that they found from an ancient alien race. They infused it into humans, and it basically lets them operate like super soldiers. They're faster, they're stronger, they just live on adrenaline. And so it's incredible what it can do to the human body, but it also does terrible things to the human mind because they almost become addicted to their own adrenaline rush. And these soldiers, as you can imagine, once they are out of the war and are just trying to integrate back into normal day life, are really struggling. So it's an interesting story because it takes the concept of something that is very true in our own military, is trying to help these soldiers to step away from their war experience and come back to society, but it's taken up a level because you have this alien technology. I'll say that the alien technology was easily my favorite part of this book. It was just so cool, and I'm gonna try not to overuse that description in this review, but it's really the best way to describe it. I thought it was really interesting, it's fun. I've seen similar things like this before, so it's perhaps not a story that is going to reinvent the science fiction genre. This is what I would describe as a cyberpunk noir space opera thriller. So it's very fast paced, it's very easy to get into, and this is one that I would comfortably recommend to those of you that are more beginners in the science fiction genre, because yes, it does deal with this Stormblood technology, but everything is explained in really simple, straightforward terms, so you as the reader fully understand how the Stormblood works. And that actually comes to something that I personally didn't love about this one, is that I felt like there was a lot of telling instead of showing. So the author does spend a lot of time really describing the technology, and the way he does it just didn't feel very natural to me. I personally prefer more organic world building, so I just wanted to see how the Stormblood technology worked as we were going through the story. Instead, it was very much laid out at the beginning, and I felt like over and over again it was kind of repeated what it does and how it affected the human body. And I prefer something more natural, but keeping in mind that I do now read a lot of science fiction, so my preference towards more subtle world building has definitely changed. I do think if I was still newer to the genre, I wouldn't have noticed that and actually might have appreciated more information right at the beginning. So it's something just to keep in mind if you're going into this book. But if you're looking for a fast-paced story, this is it. Despite the length, because it's actually quite chunky, you will fly through this story. There is non-stop action. It starts in the first page and it just goes and goes and goes. Within the story, the main character is trying to figure out what is happening. He has left the military, but he has come back to work with Harmony again because his fellow soldiers are getting killed off. And so it's a bit of a mystery, but more so a thriller of trying to investigate and see what happens. And again, it's like full of twists and turns and action. So if you are looking for a story that you will just fly through, this is one you might want to check out. Next, I want to talk about the Zookeepers Tales of Interstellar Oddities by Aiki Flinthart and Pamela Jeffs. And this is a really unique collection of science fiction short stories, but they're unique in the way that they are framed around a central narrative. So the story starts with someone coming to this space station out on the edges of the universe, and this place is just known to be a little bit off the grid, a little bit grittier, and they come to a bar, and when they are there, they start to get stories told to them of this place. And so the bar itself is called the Zoo, and you get these different characters that are so interesting in and of themselves, telling different stories of exploration, of first contact. Now the short stories themselves were so well written. I mentioned that there are two authors behind this, and one I have read before and really loved her short fiction. The other one was new to me, but I thought both of them were equally strong and their voices really blended together. If the short stories weren't identified by author name, I honestly wouldn't have known who wrote what, because it really did feel cohesive. And the stories were imaginative and fun, and it just had that space opera feel. I have a sneaking suspicion that these two authors are big fans of the science fiction genre in general, because their stories just reminded me of so many of the other forms of media that I love, everything from Mass Effect to Babylon 5 to the Becky Chambers Wayfarer series. So if you enjoy those kind of stories, I definitely recommend checking out these. And if I did have any criticism of this book, it's a really personal one, and that's the fact that I wish that this had been a novel. I fell in love with the initial setup of the space station, of the characters that we met, and even the stories themselves within this story. I just wanted to see fleshed out into longer narratives. So I would really love to see some longer fiction by either of these authors that still goes into science fiction, but is just told in novel length, because for me, that's my personal preference, is what I prefer to read, and I just wanted more. But that's a pretty positive thing to say, because I just was left wanting even more story when I was done. Overall, I definitely recommend it to those of you that enjoy short fiction. It's definitely a good one to check out. Finally, I want to end this video by gushing about a new favorite series of mine. This is technically fantasy, but it definitely has elements of science fiction in it, and that is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, the first book being the 5th season, the second book being the Obelisk Gate, and the third book being the Stone Sky. Now, since this is such a popular series on Booktube, I'm going to keep the synopsis short and instead tell you why I personally liked it. And this story is set in a future world where there are post-apocalyptic events that are called seasons, where there are catastrophic natural events that wipe out huge amounts of humanity. And the story is told over 3 perspectives. 3 women that have the ability to manipulate the earth or rocks. And so one is a young girl that has just been selected to go off and be trained in order to control her powers. There is another girl that is in the midst of her training. And then there is an older woman who has just lost their son and is dealing with that grief. Now, this is a series that I've heard talked about so much on Booktube, and I'm finally reading it for myself. I actually tried it before, but I DNF'd it or put it down back then because the writing style is really unique and is kind of hard to get into. One of the perspectives is told in second person, which can be very off-putting. And the narrative in general, I would say, is almost a bit pretentious, and it just takes a little while to get into. I never fully loved the narrative style. It's not a preference that I would have, but once I got immersed in the story itself, I completely forgot about that and absolutely loved the story that the author was telling, because it is incredible. This is a very dark tale, and I want to clarify that I mean it's dark because there are huge content warnings for abuse, whether it be domestic or sexual, and you just deal a lot with the oppression of a group of people, because those that have the ability to control the rocks and the earth are looked down upon in society, and they are treated like lesser people. And so this book has huge themes about racism and segregation, and it's just a very impactful story. It definitely has a lot of emotional heartache in it. So keep in mind that when I say it's dark, I don't mean in a fun way. But despite that, I really enjoyed this. I actually read this several months ago, back before a lot of the events have come out that have led other people to read books by Black authors. So I just picked this book up on a whim because I was looking for something to escape into. And despite everything that was happening in the world with the pandemic, I found this book to be so immersive, and I just got sucked in. I didn't think I would like such a dark story. I thought I'd want something fun and happy. But wow, everyone gushes about this book for a reason. Everyone gushes about this series for a reason. And I am going to continue that on, because if you are someone who already reads fantasy and have not checked out this book, you really have to. I'm talking specifically the first book, the 5th season, is definitely the catapult that will kind of throw you into the series, but you do want to read the whole thing through because it does read like one cohesive narrative. But what I liked so much about the first book particularly, which was my favorite, but I love the whole series and do recommend it, is the fact that we know that as the reader, the author is purposely holding things back and is not giving us all the information. So I would not recommend this to someone who's brand new to fantasy, because there is not any hand-holding. The world building is laid out very organically, but it's revealed very slowly. And even by the end of the series, I don't think I understood everything, and could definitely reread this series to pick up even more. So very complex, very dense, but at the same time a very gripping story. So one that I would recommend to anyone that loves very character-driven fantasy. I typically don't like more character-driven fantasy, but there's also enough plot and story and mystery and intrigue that it just comes together, and I really do think this book has a lot of appeal for a lot of different readers. Highly recommend it. I know everyone else on BookTube has been talking about this one for years, but I highly recommend this whole trilogy. It's fantastic. So that is it for this video. Let me know a few things down below. First, tell me which of these books are you most interested in picking up for yourself, and give me some recommendations. I want to hear about your favorite books involving artificial intelligence, and I also want opinions on which N.K. Jemisin series I should read next, because I definitely want to try more of her books. I've heard that nothing is quite as perfect as the Broken Earth trilogy, which I'm okay with, but I'm very undecided where to go from here. So thank you all for watching. If you haven't yet subscribed, I do read some science fiction, fantasy, as well as horror and thrillers. And if you are a subscriber, help me out by giving this video a thumbs up and hitting that notification bell. It tells YouTube that you like this kind of content and just helps to grow my channel. Thank you all for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.